Good morning, everybody. My name's Jillian Dimedio. Can everybody see my screen, first of all, my
Yes.
slides? Okay, great. I'm Jillian Dimedio. I'm a senior transportation electrification analyst with the Oregon Department of Transportation's Climate Office. Thanks for having me today. As Tara mentioned, I'm going to be talking about a couple tools that our team just published that are part of what we call our Go EV Charge initiative. The Go EV Charge initiative is really meant to aid Oregon decision makers and planners start to think about how to site EV charging in their communities. So I have a couple slides I'm going to run through just to provide a little bit of background and context, and then I'll actually move into a demo of two of the tools that are part of this initiative. So quickly, our transportation electrification team here at ODOT plays a leading role among state agencies in driving the electrification of the transportation sector in Oregon. Our goal really is to get more EVs on the roads throughout Oregon, from e-bikes and e-scooters up to cars, trucks, buses, and even freight vehicles as well. And the primary way that we work to increase EV adoption is by focusing on ways to increase the availability of EV charging stations across the state. And we do that because we know that accessible and reliable EV charging is really an essential prerequisite to driving EV adoption. Consumers want to feel confident that, charging their electric vehicle is going to be as easy as filling up their car at a gas station. So we work to increase EV charging in a number of ways. We do manage a number of EV charging funding programs. We work in close partnership with our utility partners, with EV charging companies, with external other state agencies. But we also do some studies and analyses to sort of better understand the policy landscape and the infrastructure that's really needed to accelerate this transition. In 2021, we published our foundational study called the Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis, or TINA study, and you'll hear me refer to that acronym, the TINA study, many more times throughout the course of this presentation. And the TINA study really estimated the charging needs in Oregon in both the near and longer term across 9 different use cases. So we looked at light duty vehicle charging, and up through medium and heavy duty vehicles as well. And the modeling that we did in TINA told us that there really is an extraordinary need for EV charging infrastructure growth throughout the state over the next 15 years if we want to meet our EV adoption goals and our climate goals as a state. In particular, the study told us we need a 5-fold increase in EV charging by 2025 and a 44-fold increase by 2035. So we know that the challenge ahead is enormous. We followed up this work most recently by publishing our Go EV Charge initiative. We just published this in August of 2023, and it's really meant to build on this foundational work that we did in TINA, and I'll talk a little bit about how it does that. So Go EV Charge is a suite of online resources, and really what we consider to be our one-stop shop of information and tools for anybody who is interested in deploying EV charging in Oregon. It consists of our centerpiece document, which is a report called the Guide for Oregon EV Charging Deployment. This document really builds on that foundational work that we did in TINA. So TINA set the stage and told us that we need to see a significant increase in EV charging. And our deployment guide is really that follow-up how-to for those who are looking to get started. But the report was also published with 2 companion tools, our TINA dashboard and our EV infrastructure planning map. And all of these resources are really designed to be used together. So our guide contains all the information necessary to really plan for and initiate charging station development. So it includes things like an overview of EV charging basics. So what are the different types of EV charging and what is most appropriate for which use case? It has a long chapter on the best practices in site design, in ensuring equitable access and equitable design, for engaging your local electric utility, how to deal with permitting in your local jurisdiction, et cetera. It also includes planning level cost estimates for both equipment and installation, and then a list of current funding resources, and a whole lot more. And then the TINA dashboard is really designed to help users estimate how much and what type of charging is needed and by when. And then lastly, our infrastructure map is designed to help users think about how to actually then go and site those stations in their communities based on their individual priorities. Both of these companion tools are interactive and customizable, and I'll show you sort of how right now. So let me, I'm gonna stop sharing and then go into the first demo. Let me know if you guys can now see the Excel model.
Yep.
Great, thank you. So this tool, this is our TINA dashboard. This tool was created because after we published our TINA study, we started receiving pretty regular requests for the data underneath and all the underlying model as well. And in particular, people really wanted to see the TINA numbers, which were originally presented statewide for their individual communities. Our original model did not break it out by geography. It also didn't break out any of the TINA numbers by year. We just looked at milestone years. So we looked at 2025, 2030, and 2035. And it wasn't really designed with the end user in mind either. So this tool is hopefully much more user-friendly, and it includes a number of data visualizations. You can see those charging needs by geography and by year, and it's also customizable. So you can change some of the assumptions that we made in our original TINA model and kind of see how that changes the mix of EV charging needed. As well, for those who really want to dig into the details, it does include the underlying model and all of the data that feeds into it as well. So a couple things to note. This model does only include the results for our light duty use cases. So it doesn't estimate for now EV charging for medium and heavy duty. And it's broken out into various sections, as you can see at the bottom here, kind of based on the type of user. We think most users will kind of just play around in this blue section here, which is our dashboard. But for those who want to geek out a little bit more on the data, which I suspect is maybe all of this group, you can access you can look at the results in kind of a different way. So you can see it by use case rather than summarized in the aggregate, or by geography. So census tract, municipality, or county. And then even more, this orange section here is the actual model that you can dig into. And lastly, all of the data that feeds into the model. So that's kind of a basic orientation of the tool. You can see these first two pages are just sort of our introduction here, kind of talks about what's included in each section. You can navigate through links, and then we have a glossary as well, which spells out the many acronyms that we use throughout. So first, I'm gonna do just a really quick demonstration. This is our input tab here. This is where you can change some assumptions if you wish to do so. You can see that any of the cells that can be changed are highlighted in yellow. Once you do make changes, they'll turn to a blue shading, so you at least know that you have changed the tool from a default TINA assumption. And the TINA default value is always listed beneath as well. So you can always kind of see, how far you've come. Inputs are separated by the use case that they impact. And then there's sort of a description of how that happens on the side here. And then below, we do have a sensitivity table as well. So you can kind of get a sense just for 2025 year, if you change certain targets by a certain percentage, what's going to happen, increase, decrease, and by how much. So let's just demonstrate an example here. We think one assumption that's likely to be changed more than others is the percentage of total electric light duty vehicles in Oregon by a given year. If you think adoption may look different in your particular community, you can go ahead and change these values. So let's be optimistic and say that we think that EV adoption is going to go up to 15% by 2025. Let's say 35% by 2030 and 60% by 2035. You can see that those right away that those cells change color, so you know that they're not the default TINA values. If you have then changed assumptions, you'll want to navigate over to our results TINA comparison tab. And this is where you can, I don't know, that table's not showing up for me. Can you guys see the second TINA table, or is it?
No.
Oh yeah, I don't know why that's not showing up, but
There
it goes. Okay, so you can kind of see side by side how changing those assumptions changes the mix of EV charging needed. So obviously we need a lot more charging if we're going to assume a higher percentage adoption of electric vehicles sooner. And you can also see in this table as well how much those values went up. So in 2025, especially increase of 150% is pretty significant. So that's one example of how the tool can be used. I'm going to put these back to their original values here for the next example. And then just show you the other really useful feature of this tool is to kind of look at, as I said, a lot of folks were interested in seeing the TINA numbers both by year and by geography. So this is the tab where you can sort of separate that out. It'll default to statewide values, but if you do want to see it by county, you can navigate to county, to municipality, or even down to the census tract. So let's just see, I live in Bend, Oregon, so maybe I want to see charging needed in Deschutes County, and you can go ahead and change those values, and then you'll see, by year, how much charging is needed in Deschutes County, and then by the sort of use case here. So that is our TINA model. I'm gonna do a new share again here and bring up our second tool, which is our EV infrastructure planning map. So as I said, the tools are designed really to be used together. The TINA model is telling you how much charging is needed. And then this tool is going to sort of help you think about how you might then go and site that charging in your community. So as you can see, when you first pull up the map, it kind of loads here with this introductory screen. It gives you a little bit of background, some tips on how to use it, and then some additional resources. You can click out of that and see our map then load. As soon as you load the map, it's going to go to this sort of statewide view, and we have certain data layers that are always on. Right now, we have all existing charging stations, both by level 2 and fast charging stations, and then both public and private. An example of a private charging station is a Tesla station because they cannot be used by all drivers, or at least not at the moment. Eventually, they will be able to. And then you can see also our priority area layer is showing here. This is the blue layer underneath that basically is ranking census tracts on a color gradient from low priority to high priority for siting. Specifically, this one is level 2 charging stations, but we also have a priority area layer for fast charging stations. And then I'll just say you can sort of zoom into, let's say we zoom into the Portland metro area. You can see a little bit more clearly, all the various census tracts and how that shading differs. So the higher, the darker blue shade is going to be a higher priority based on our analysis, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Before we dive too much deeper, I'll talk about a few more features of the map. So I think probably everybody in this group is used to navigating around a GIS web map, but this first tab here is going to be your legend, and it'll show you which layers are turned on and their symbology. You can navigate down. This is a list of all the layers that we have in the map. So in addition to our priority area layers, we also have a number of other layers that sort of help provide additional context. And these are organized into different categories. So you can see these are all our existing chargers. We also have a number of transportation and land use layers. So you can see we have all the park and rides, rest areas, all of our electric alternative fuel corridors, our Oregon Scenic Byways and Oregon Scenic Bikeways. We have our climate hazard risk map that was created by our Climate Office team. Some traffic data, activity centers is kind of how we measure commercial activity. And so that might be a metric that you want to think about when citing EV charging. And then some values here from the TINA study. So it'll actually tell you, which census tracts need more charging if you turn on that layer. And then we have a number of layers that you can only see when you kind of zoom in a little bit more, but commercial land use, we have Portland on-street parking and Portland bike parking and Portland street lamps. Ideally, we'd have that data for the whole state, but it was only available for Portland. Then we have a number of population-related layers. So we have renting households, multifamily housing, information on jobs, existing EV registrations, all vehicle registrations, and population. We have a few layers related to equity. So we have an ODOT equity layer in there, just for those who are familiar with the Justice 40 initiative, which is the federal um, definition of disadvantaged communities. And this one is specific for a particular federal program. And then we have an air quality index. Next, I talked about our priority layers a little bit. So you can see this blue layer that's already on there is our priority layer for level 2 chargers, but we also have one for fast chargers. These layers were developed by calculating a prioritization score for each census tract, again, for both level 2 and fast chargers. And by combining metrics used to essentially increase to meet our goals in the following 3 areas. So increasing equity, so the equitable distribution of charging infrastructure, reducing charging gaps, and then high station utilization. So our analysis essentially included a weighted average of a lot of different metrics that were sort of bucketed into these 3 categories and then ranked. Equity had the highest ranking in our analysis, and that really comes out of the TINA study. We know that that public investment in particular is really going to be needed in disadvantaged and rural communities, because that is where the private sector is less likely to invest. So this does have a public funds lens to it, by ranking equity higher than filling in station gaps, as well as charging station utilization. If, however, if you're a community that has sort of different priorities, you can look at the priority scores for all of these individually. So we have priority scores if you're just considering equity, just considering filling in the gap, or utilization, and they're organized by both level 2 and fast chargers. So that's a little bit. Oh, I'll do one more sort of overview of another feature. This is our filter feature. We have a filter for both level 2 and fast charging. I'm just going to do a quick example with the level 2 filter. So let's say, for example, we want to only see census tracts that are defined as highly disadvantaged using ODOT's definition. You can sort of navigate here and just select high or medium high, and it'll filter out all the census tracts that don't meet that criteria. If you want to see census tracts that both meet ODOT's definition of high and the Justice 40, you can further filter things. And then the tool that I really like is this filter with multifamily housing density. The reason that we consider multifamily housing when thinking about EV charging is that we know that residents that live in multifamily housing are going to have a much harder time. It's going to be more expensive, more complex to install charging at home, which is, of course, the most convenient and the most affordable way to fuel your electric vehicle. And so in areas that do have a high density of multifamily housing, you'll probably want to think about making more public stations available for those residents. And so you can actually filter out census tracts. Let's say you want to only look at census tracts that have at least 50% density. Obviously, looking at the statewide view isn't very helpful, but if you zoom in to any metro area, then you can sort of prioritize things that way. So that's a quick orientation. I'm just refreshing to get the original layers back up. I want to just run through, I thought I'd run through just one example of how you might use this tool. There are lots of ways to use it, and a lot of ways a lot of different questions it can answer. But I thought I'd run through one example here before we turn it over to questions. So let's assume in this example that we want to identify corridors in Oregon that need fast charging stations. We know that that's obviously going to go a long way in sort of building that consumer confidence, even though most people don't drive long distances on a daily basis. The psychology of knowing that they can drive anywhere at any time is important to making that leap in adopting an electric vehicle. So we know that we actually have 11 electric alternative fuel corridors in Oregon. I'm going to turn on that layer so we can kind of see where they are. We know that these 11 corridors are already going to be the target of a significant amount of federal funding. So I thought we would think about how do we, if we want to identify secondary corridors that maybe don't have a source of funding right now, how would we use the map to sort of go about and do that? So first I'm going to turn off our layers for level 2 stations, because you're going to be citing just fast charging along corridors primarily. So these are all the fast charging stations that already exist. And so the first thing you're going to want to think about is, where are the highest traffic corridors? So we can turn on our traffic layer. So number of vehicles using the road each day. So you can see, obviously, our primary corridors have quite a lot of traffic. That's to be expected. They're going to get a lot of fast charging stations already through existing programs. But there are a lot of secondary corridors that also hosts a lot of vehicles that maybe aren't the target right now. One that sticks out right away to me is Oregon 58, which is sort of the connector over the Cascades between I-5 and US 97. There's also Oregon or US 199, which kind of goes in southern Oregon, kind of goes from Grants Pass down into California. US 30 is also one that has a lot of traffic, but you can see US 30 has quite a bunch of fast charging stations already. So you might focus your efforts here on, let's say, Oregon 58. Another thing you might want to look at is, are there any rest areas that might be a good location for charging? You can see there's one kind of right in the middle there, which could be an ideal location, both from a electrical capacity standpoint, and also just having the available land. I think another interesting thing to look at in this scenario is the density, as I said, of multifamily housing, because we know that these residents are going to want public charging, and it's going to be a whole lot more convenient if it's fast charging. And so you might find a corridor that has both a lot of traffic and a high density of multifamily housing that will just increase the need. And that's where, zooming in on the Portland metro area, you can kind of see there's plenty of corridors. 213 sticks out for me, that not only has a lot of traffic, is running through communities that do have a higher density of multifamily housing, and also are cited as, let's see, I didn't turn off, this is the priority layer for level 2. So we want to turn that one off and turn the fast charging on. So you can see similarly that it still runs through priority areas for citing fast charging stations. So that's kind of one use case. We do include on our webpage a tutorial video that kind of runs through other additional ways to use the map, but I'm sure there are lots of ways that we haven't thought of as well. And last thing I'll say before kind of turning it over is that the data layers that we included on the map were chosen not only based on their relevance to sort of citing EV charging, but also availability. It's not always easy to get, as I'm sure you all know, the data that you want and need. So over time, I'll say we hope to maintain this tool and improve upon it as we receive feedback from users, as we get more, more access to more data. And so I'll just leave it at that. And if anybody has any ideas for things they'd like to see, that's always appreciated. So thank you. I don't know how I did on time, but if there's time for Q&A, I'm happy to.
You're doing great on time. We've got about 12 or 13 minutes.
Great.
So we're great.
Great wealth of information. So I guess people raise your hand or just chime in, I guess. So I don't see anything in the chat at this point. Questions for Jillian. I think it's pretty amazing, these tools and the number of layers that are there to help you cite those locations. One question I had is, would people be able to like pull down those layers? So after they've like identified, hey, through all this stuff, we figured out to put them here, and then they could help justify that in their plans and so forth. Especially I just love like the equity layers and all that.
Yeah, you can. I mean, I don't know what you mean by sort of justifying the analysis, but you can access all the underlying data. You can export that. We know like some partners in particular, City of Portland, may want to sort of make their own map, with the data that they have. And so it was important to be able to share all the underlying data that we had so that people can then use that. I forgot to mention too that you can I think this is pretty common in any GIS map, but you can click on any given attribute and see sort of all the underlying data underneath, or access the data table right within the tool as well without exporting. So that is another feature.
Excellent. And you mentioned a few other use cases that are in the video, just topic wise. Is there a short list you could give us?
Yeah, I can, let me pull them up to refresh my memory. We have also a methodology document, and a sort of, a user guide that kind of runs through them as well. So one that we sort of outline in our user guide is like, how can you use the tool to identify a location that aligns with specific grant criteria? So as we, I know from my work, we apply for a lot of funding, and every funding program has different criteria that you sort of need to meet or that they prioritize. And so you can kind of use the tool in that way. Let's say they prioritize disadvantaged communities, so you can make sure you use the filter to only look at census tracts that are located within disadvantaged communities. If they prioritize closing a gap within the existing charging network, you might use that priority layer that's only looking at the metrics analyzed for closing a network gap. And then also, they might be looking at where is there obviously no existing charging infrastructure nearby. So you can kind of use the map to look at all those different layers and find a location that might align with all three of those different criteria. That's one example. Yeah.
It looks like we have a question there from Jonathan Slayson from RSG. Are there any electrical grid information, substations?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is, I would say, an existing gap that we'd like to fill. We do have, I didn't show it, but we do have all of the utility service area, a map of all the service areas. So you can see in any given region what electric utility is covered. I think we might have substations on there, but the utilities are very, they keep information about their capacity pretty close to the chest. So we haven't been able to get that information from any utilities yet. But that is obviously an area that would be extremely useful for folks that are looking at siting charging.
Right, because it's so much about the utilities, right, and their capacity. And so clustering things can,
absolutely
overtax an area.
The existing capacity is obviously is going to be a huge driver of cost, right? So if you don't have, if you have to make a lot of utility upgrades, it's going to significantly increase the cost of your project. So siting areas that have existing electrical capacity or that are near a substation, that's definitely a criteria you'd want to look at.
And I feel like we're breaking down some of these projects now to just lay the utilities so that they're available for the follow-on work that might actually be building out those sites and so forth.
Yeah.
Let's see, Eric has a question in there. Is there an opportunity for PUC conversion? Utilities should want to know forthcoming demand from our planning and implementation.
Yeah, conversation, just, appreciating the sensitivity. It's also like, if we're going to transition to transportation electrification in America, we're going to have conversations between, the state municipals and the utility sector. So, absolutely. I mean, we can do those, but if they know how we're doing all this planning efforts, feels like the PUC maybe could help the utilities navigate, if it's commercial challenges or terror challenges. I don't know. I'm sure you've dug in there, but it feels like an important space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't know. Yeah.
I agree. We work closely with the PUC, and so that's not a conversation we've had directly just yet. But I think obviously they'd be interested in that data as well. The utilities do plenty of planning. They are absolutely planning for this transition, but they don't, and they share what they have to with the PUC, but I don't know that they share all that they know.
Thanks.
Carol has a hand up.
This is just so impressive. I wondered if you guys created this from whole cloth, or if the concept was Oregon developed, or if you borrowed from any other state, and kind of a corollary, are any other states doing this? Is there an opportunity to propagate it across the country?
Yeah, there are no original ideas, right? So I would say we definitely borrowed ideas. I hadn't seen a statewide map like this. There are nationwide maps, and I'm trying to remember the organizations that I'm sure NREL was involved in creating one. But there are tools out there. They weren't what I wanted to see, and so I was assuming they wouldn't be what other Oregonians wanted to see either, because it is that nationwide data. They focused pretty heavily on corridors, so like the fast charging and where are we seeing the most traffic, interstate type stuff. And so I really wanted to get something more, specific to Oregon communities, and dial it in that way. I think now we're starting to see more tools like this come out, that are in development. I know Washington is working on something really similar, because I did a demo with a regional group and they were interested to learn more. And so I think we'll start to see a lot more of this. And then there are some like private consulting firms that offer this, this type of analysis, but they don't share the tool for free.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting for the state to really help out local communities to have the tools at their fingertips, kind of a consistent set, and not have to run around and grab all those individually.
Yeah.
Chris, you popped up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Tara. And apologies if I may have missed this, but this is a really great dashboard. I wonder if there's a connection to like the potential dimension of demand for some of these corridors. Visualizing, traffic volumes and using that as a way to help prioritize some of these locations. It seems like now it's just about sort of geography and filling geographical gaps, but could you speak maybe to kind of the roadmap, no pun intended, for that, I guess? Yeah.
I think we did try to consider demand, and we do have traffic data in there. We did consider traffic and sort of like registration data as we did our analysis to create those priority scores. So station utilization is one of those 3 categories that is ranked within our priority score. It is the lowest ranking. And so sort of like noting, and the reason for that is that the private sector, that is their number 1 focus, right? Like they want to cite stations where they're going to be used, because that's how they're going to turn a profit. Our role as the public sector and with public funding is to sort of support those areas that aren't going to get that private sector investment. So we do consider demand and utilization, but it is a lower consideration. But we do have that layer that if you just wanted to look at utilization, we do have that layer on there. So you could just look at, if you just want to consider prioritizing, high utilization of the station, what are the census tracts that sort of rank the highest? And in our methodology document, we kind of go through how we measured utilization. Definitely not a perfect analysis. And that's part of the reason we wanted to include all those other contextual layers, so that, ideally we would have had a tool that sort of toggled. People could change the weighting as they wanted it. And we did talk about that at the beginning of the project. But it was just too complicated with the budget and the timeline that we had. And I haven't seen a tool like that exists. But that was my ideal. We couldn't get to that. And so we came up with these static layers where we sort of did the analysis for people. But that is part of the reason we did include all those other layers, so that if it doesn't quite meet your needs, you can look at some other things and sort of get at utilization. Like you might look at job density, you might look at, like I said, multifamily housing density, or population, or EV registrations. Those are all ways to sort of get at utilization of the stations, some of which are considered in our priority analysis, but not all of them. So yeah, and then as I said, we're very interested in adding new layers over time. So if there are specific data layers that you think really get at that utilization piece, I'd want to hear about it for sure.
Great, thanks. Yeah, great stuff.
Looks like we have time for maybe one last question before we need to move to the next speaker.
Well, I just might note, I put something in the chat. You know, if people don't know already, we're with a dozen or so California exception states where we have this more advanced requirement on our vehicle manufacturers, so the sales of electric vehicles will transition quicker. And so there's a comparison there with national in the chat. So we're trying to keep up with that with the charging, knowing that what are the stats, Jillian? You know, home charging, overnight charging, which is probably like putting in a new dryer electricity outlet.
Exactly. Level
Is
2.
where, what is that, like half or more of our charging will occur?
80% right now. Yeah.
So then it's like stealing those multifamily homes or my 1908 house that doesn't have a garage with someplace locally for overnight.
Exactly.
And then obviously we do longer distances and need to do that as well. So that's what this system is about.
Yeah.